Good morning. My name is Michael Haberman. I'm the president of Pencil, and on behalf of our founder and board chair, Lisa Belsberg, and our entire board of directors and our staff, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation on leadership. See a lot of faces. I'm glad to see that Friday morning at 8 a.m. didn't scare people away. But I see a lot of familiar faces in the room as well, people who are involved in our program. But some of you are new to Pencil, so I did want to just tell you a little bit about the work that we do. Pencil works to improve student achievement by developing opportunities for the private sector to engage with public schools. Our flagship program is the Pencil Partnership Program, where we develop and support long-term relationships between private sector leaders and principals to overcome challenges and create new opportunities for students. By leveraging their collective resources and expertise, our partners tackle a range of issues that impact student achievement, such as attendance, parent involvement, career awareness, and the use of technology. Now, recently, we've seen more of our partners focusing on the issue of strong school leadership. It might seem obvious that, like any organization, a strong school needs a strong leader. But I've discussed this many times with many people, including our friend Ernest Logan, who's here as the head of the union that represents principals. We've talked about this a lot. And the reality is that too often that idea is taken for granted. We don't spend enough time thinking about what it takes to lead an organization as complex as a school. So at Pencil, we don't believe that you can run a school exactly like a business. But we do believe that there are a lot of similarities and a lot of knowledge transfer that can take place. And so we decided to take a closer look at this issue. A couple of years ago, we started a program called a Business Leader for a Day, where we encourage our business partners to invite their principals to their place of work for a day to explore all the many issues that go into being a strong leader. This year, we decided to take an even deeper dive. We've been writing about it on the Huffington Post and Education Week, and we've run seminars and workshops for our partners on this very issue of leadership. And so that's what brings us to today's event, From the Boardroom to the Classroom, which is actually the official kickoff of this year's Business Leader for a Day program. And we're extremely excited about today's panelists because in their own way, they've all straddled both worlds, as you'll hear. You have their full biographies in front of you, so I'm just going to give you the cliff notes about each one of them. In addition to being the president and CEO of JetBlue, Dave Barger was a longtime partner to PS 153 in Harlem. Taking the best of JetBlue's corporate culture, Dave has helped his former principal, Monica George Fields, who was going to be, Monica, are you here? Was going to be with us. Working with Monica, they completely transformed the school's culture, took their teacher attrition rate from 25% to 3%, and transformed the school from an F school to an A school. We're fortunate, by the way, to also have Dave as a member of Pencil's board of directors. Abbe Raven is the CEO and president of A&E Television Networks, but equally important to us, for the past 5 years, she's been a Pencil partner to the Humanities and Arts High School in Queens, which happens to be located in the same building that Abbe attended high school when she was growing up. And I've been there with her, and it is true. She has shown me her honor roll, her name on the wall, the honor roll. It is true. I've seen it myself. Before Abbe entered the business world, she was a teacher herself, and so she's used those two experiences to help enrich the school's curriculum. And in fact, this afternoon, Abbe is hosting her principal, Rosemarie Omard, at her office for her own Business Leader for a Day visit, and Rosemarie is here with us. Glad to have Rosemarie. Richard Laine is the Director of Education at the Wallace Foundation, and we've been unofficially, as we're planning him, calling him the bridge for this event. Under Richard, Wallace has really been leading the charge to understand why school leadership is important and what strong school leadership looks like. And his deep research is going to provide a really interesting perspective on what we can learn from the corporate world and transform that to the school world. And then bringing it all together is our moderator, Adam Bryant. Now, Adam is the deputy national editor of the New York Times and oversees coverage of education issues, military affairs, and law. But my staff will tell you that I'm embarrassed to say, but I'm not embarrassed to say, I'm a little starstruck this morning because I obsessively read his well-known column, The Corner Office, which appears every Sunday in the business section of the New York Times. And he's so perfect for us because he covers education. His wife is a teacher, but The Corner Office, the entire focus is about leadership. And so each week it appears in an interview with a different CEO exploring the issues of leadership. And my staff will tell you I cut it out and email it and hand it around on an almost weekly basis. So I'm delighted to have him here. And Adam's columns were just turned into his first book called The Corner Office, Indispensable and Unexpected Lessons from CEOs on How to Lead and Succeed. And the book is, I'll give the plug because he won't, but I just downloaded it on my Kindle from Amazon, and so you can download it. So we're really excited to have the panel. Now, before I turn over to them, just a couple of quick items. First, I'm waving to that camera back there because we now have affiliate programs in Rochester, in Baltimore, and Philadelphia. And we're excited to be streaming this live so that our partners in those cities can listen and learn as well. And reminder to you, those of you out there, if you want to ask a question, you can tweet it to us at Helping Schools, and anyone else watching can tweet as well. I have to extend an enormous thank you to our friends at Time Warner for providing us and being our host this morning, as they are many times throughout the year in this incredible facility, and to our good friends Lisa Kiros, who's not here, and Dan Oshiak and Jeannie Fallon, who are both here. We just can't thank you enough. This venue is part of what makes our events so terrific. I'd also want to recognize Paul Verdi, who's a Senior Vice President of Commercial Real Estate at Capital One, and we thank Capital One for being a sponsor of today's event. Finally, as we think about leadership today, let's not forget about the leaders of tomorrow. Each summer, we partner with another wonderful organization called Virtual Enterprise to run the Pencil Fellows Summer Internship Program. This is really a unique opportunity to change a student's life forever. Over the past 3 years, we've placed about 130 students in paid summer internships each summer, and this year we have 150 students waiting for paid summer internships. Abbe and Dave at JetBlue and A&E have both participated in our program for the past 3 years and will be participating again. And I think they can vouch for the fact that it is not only a way to really develop our future leaders and change the life of a student, but it's really a wonderful opportunity to get some low-cost, really high-quality help for your business to take care of some of those projects. So we really encourage you to think about participating in Pencil Fellows, think about helping us develop our future leaders, and there are flyers in the materials in front of you so you can sign up or email us, or there's lots of Pencil staff around. We'll be around. Please ask us any questions, but we hope you'll think about helping us develop our future leaders as we think about today's. And with that, it is my pleasure to get off the stage and to welcome Adam and all our panelists to the stage. Enjoy the conversation.
I will jump in because time is short. I'm really honored to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. As Michael said, my wife's a high school teacher, and I'm involved a lot with our local schools. I have tremendous respect and admiration for what principals do. I think you have an incredibly difficult job. All your various stakeholders and customers, if you will, students, parents, teachers, administrators, the board, local taxpayers. I think the hardest thing I've ever done in my life was to work on the middle school newspaper for about a year and trying to get those kids to focus and tell them, I had to explain to them, I want you to interview somebody, but you can't interview your friends. You actually have to go to somebody you don't know, and that was a tough message to get across. The other reason I'm really happy to be here is that I feel a real kinship between the mission of Pencil and what I do in Corner Office, which is a very simple idea, which is CEOs have almost always been interviewed as strategists, right? What's a competitive landscape? Your company is zigging while others are zagging. And after being a business journalist for about 20 years, I thought, well, wait a minute. Setting strategy is only part of your job, and that the real 24/7 job is managing, leading, building a team, fostering a corporate culture. So I thought, well, what if I sat down with them and asked them really just open-ended questions about how they lead and how they manage, and just as importantly, how they learned to lead, because I think a lot of people have a sense that CEOs are sort of born leaders. From the time you're in diapers, you've been doing this. And I've been a manager myself for about 10 years and probably made every mistake in the book and invented a few along the way. So that was kind of the real start of Corner Office. I've interviewed more than 100 of them now. And I have to say, I have stopped thinking of the letter CEO as referring to Chief Executive Officer. I think of it now in terms of Chief Education Officer. And I do that for a couple of reasons. What has struck me is that the CEOs I've interviewed, they're incredible students. They're very fast learners, very quick studies, which makes sense, right? They have to be able to talk very quickly with their financial people, marketing people, operations. So they're both really good students, but also teachers because they have to turn around and explain things and not only the mission of the company, but to grow and develop new leaders. So that's been a really important insight for me, and I've really enjoyed all the time I've spent talking with the CEOs. For the book I did, I just want to describe this briefly. One of my goals was by the time I sat down to write the book, I had about a million words from all the transcripts from the interviews. And I really said, you know, what are the lessons here? What are the broader points here? I'm not the first person who's interviewed CEOs about what's important to them. But one of the things I tried to do that's a little different, when people have interviewed CEOs in the past, they'll ask them a simple question, what's important to you? And they'll get answers like honesty, integrity, and okay. And a lot of people have put together books with things like honesty is really important. And I said, well, what if we just assume all that stuff is table stakes? That just assume people they're honest, they have integrity, they're good communicators, they're hard workers, etc. If so, then what separates people as they move up through the ranks? And again, I just sort of looked through the transcripts and the interviews to try to pick out the qualities. So for the next just few minutes, because I want to get to the real stars of the show, I just want to kind of skip across the top of the icebergs to capture some of this. I really pulled out 5 qualities that separates people as they move up in an organization. But what has struck me actually in the last couple of months is that these qualities are not just what separate individuals, but organizations as well, whether it's a school or a company. So the 5 very quickly are passionate curiosity, and I think that translates into a company or a school. Is it a learning organization? Is there a culture of learning? The second one is battle-hardened confidence. It's really a track record of facing adversity and dealing with it and getting through it. It builds a sense of character. Every organization, every person, we've all faced adversity in one sense or another. And I really get the sense of some companies, when they pull together and get through a difficult time, it really builds a sense of character. The third one is team smarts, which I like to think of as the organizational equivalent of street smarts. Do you understand how to get things done? Do you know how to pull together people for ad hoc projects, because that's how so much work is being done these days. The fourth one is a simple mindset. Are you able to look at sort of an ocean of data or 100 possible choices and say, this is the one thing that really matters, or the 2 or 3? And the last one is fearlessness, which I like to think of, things might be fine. They might be going pretty well, okay. People who are fearless, organizations that are fearless say it could be better. And we may have to turn things upside down or inside out, create a little disruption to get better. So those are really the 5. And again, I think they're useful things to think about. And I sort of feel like the warm-up act here, and maybe you'll bank off some of this about your own organizations. Some other highlights, again, these are just things that I've pulled out of all my interviews with the CEOs. There's the importance of creating a sense of mission within your organization. I think really effective leaders can state a mission, and you really get a sense sort of in their bones that they believe it and that they're truly passionate about it. The importance of small gestures. This is something that provided, I think, some of the most memorable stories from the CEOs I interviewed. If you think of it in business terms, return on investment, right? So you spend a minute with somebody, maybe writing a handwritten note to just sort of thank somebody for doing a particularly good job. Return on investment, off the charts. I heard so many stories of people. Lloyd Blankfein, Goldman Sachs, said that when he was working at Yankee Stadium when he was a teenager, he still remembers to this day the pitchers who were warming up in the bullpen who opened the door for him. And I'm sure you've all got examples of that in your own life, of just when somebody did something, a handwritten note, a thank you, took you aside. Simply giving feedback. Again, I've been a manager myself for about 10 years, and I've learned a lot from these interviews I've done, and I've come to understand the importance of simply giving people feedback and doing it in a coaching way as opposed to criticisms. I am no longer uncomfortable with potentially uncomfortable conversations. I've really come to understand that you just need to talk to people and you need to be open, and it's often how you do it. If you have the person's best interests at heart, and I think people pick up on that sense, whether you're really trying to make them better as opposed to, giving them a grade for a performance they just did. Getting feedback, this is a theme that came up in a lot of the interviews. CEOs spend a tremendous amount of time walking around and asking everybody, how are things? What's keeping you up at night? What could we do? What could we as an organization be doing better? What could I as a CEO be doing better? They recognize that great ideas can come from literally anywhere in the organization. It might not be as efficient time or feel as efficient as plowing through 100 emails, but the CEOs recognize that it's important to get out there to hear what people have to say. And finally, just creating a culture based on a set of values that are more than just a poster on the wall or things that are discussed at an offsite over a weekend. A lot of the organizations that the CEOs run that I've talked to, there's a real clear sense that they actually live them and that they're reinforced with maybe awards over the course of a year. They're repeated often. One of the things that has come up in a lot of the interviews when I've asked CEOs what surprised them about becoming a CEO, and they said it's just the importance of repetition. They thought that if they said something once, this is our 3 goals for the year, they thought everybody heard them and well that was enough. And they just learned it's like you have to just simply keep repeating it. Somebody had a very good line that when your staff starts making fun of you, that's when you know they've actually internalized it. And that's actually a good thing. And I thought that was a very good lesson. Again, it's a theme that has come up in a lot of the interviews. So that's, again, I'm the sort of warm-up act. Let's start with you, Abbe. If you want to bank off any one of those specifically, or maybe your own thoughts on what's really important to you in terms of leadership.
I could listen to you all day, and really, you've captured so much. I think for me, leadership has always been about teamwork and about being a leader of a team. I'm a very team-oriented leader, whereas I have a group of my managers who work very closely with me. And it's very, very interesting. I never sit at the head of the table. I'm part of that team. And so when we're strategizing and coming up with plans or ideas, it's as a group. I may be that chief communication officer that you sort of referenced about talking about that mission and getting out there and communicating that to the rest of the organization. You said something so important about saying things over and over. One of the things that I think has helped us as an organization has been about creating our mission. Now, our mission over the years, I've actually been at my company for 28 years, and it's seen it transform in many forms. And our mission has changed and evolved. But what I look to as the head of the company is getting my group to really all agree on what our mission is. And I may help shape that, but we're all in sync. And when we walk out of that room, the leadership group, and it's a small group, when we walk out of that room, we know what it is, and we say it over and over again. And we know we're successful when the next time I'm in the elevator and someone says it back to me. And you have to live it. You said such important things about walking, I call it walking the halls, and as a principal, you guys do that all the time. That's a big part of what I do. I walk the halls. I walk into a cubicle and say, what's happening today? What are you working on? And it goes a long way that you're in touch with what's going on. But delivering that mission, really honing in on it, and making sure you stick to it. You said something else about honesty and integrity, and those are words. Those are, but it's really about living it. And I'm a big believer in what you see is what you get. And I think it goes a long way in your organization that people know when you say something, you mean it, you live it, you breathe it, you walk it. And I think, I tend to be a more accessible leader. I have 1,100 employees. I try over a period of time to break bread with almost everyone. I have these small breakfast meetings or lunch or coffee meetings where I'll take a group of 10 employees and we'll sit down, and they're from all different levels, and we'll talk about what's going on and talking about getting great ideas from the larger organization is so important. So it's a combination of those things. I could go on forever, but to me it's all about mission, communication, and walking that walk and talking the talk.
And what Abbe said underscores, I think, an important point. Again, this came up in a lot of the interviews. I've come to see there's this kind of weird contradiction in leadership that on the one hand, this point about communication, you have to repeat things over and over and over for people to really hear them, yet people are always studying leaders for very subtle cues, so that you might be walking down the hall one day and furrowing your brow because you're thinking through a puzzle, and then 2 days later it's like, oh no, what's wrong? So there's this weird contradiction that on the one hand, in terms of communication, you almost have to have a megaphone and say things 100 times over. On the other hand, sort of the slightest little cue, it's like something's wrong. Abbe looks concerned. So it's one of those things you have to be aware of, and it doesn't make sense, but I think that's part of the difficulty of leadership, that a lot of things that seem contradictory.
I'll just add to that, just a little point. I got in the elevator one day, and I got out, and I said, oh, that doesn't look so good. That color is a little off. The next day it was painted. Yeah. I didn't want it painted, but it's that message. It was that you don't realize how important what you say, what you do is, and you're absolutely right. And in a lot of ways, as CEOs, we're cheerleaders for our companies. You're cheerleaders for your schools.
Right. Dave, thoughts from you?
Sure. Adam, I'll pick up off the theme of Chief Education Officer. And because I think that really strikes nicely in terms of what we're trying to do within JetBlue. As we're now growing, we're 13,000 strong, and the leadership, our officer, director, management team, it's how do you teach others what you're looking for? And not just the hard aspects of the P&L and the balance sheet and income statement, the finances, the operating side of the house, or whatever it might be, or the strategy of the company, but also as they enter the room, are they thinking about entering the room, teaching those that they're leading in the organization? And I think that's probably the number one lesson that I've learned in this role, now leading JetBlue. Yesterday, as an example, we had our spring leadership conference on the aircraft carrier Intrepid. Nice setting. Having fun while we're also just reinforcing how are we doing. And let's talk about how we're doing to 115 of our leaders in the organization, and really attempting to teach that here's what's happening in the competitive landscape. This is what's happening with the cost of oil in our business, commodities, but why it's important, and what we can do to also try to really navigate around it and improve the performance of the company. So I think that whether it's the Spring Leadership Conference with officers and directors, within JetBlue we have a centralized learning called JetBlue University, and we spend time with, of course, training pilots and technicians and flight attendants and airport staff and reservation crew members, but also leadership and development. So teaching what we're looking for. I teach a module called Inspiring Greatness in Others. A lot of my story comes from my work and support with PS 153 at the Adam Clayton Powell K-5 school in Monica George. So I think about even at orientation on day one, where we welcome new crew members to JetBlue, it's important for the CEO to be there, the COO to be there, talking about the business of the business. So you're attempting to educate on day one. So I would just gravitate to that theme. I think the best leaders at our company are those leaders that enter the room looking to teach, as opposed to, and that could be from the front of the room, that could be from the back of the room, but looking to teach as opposed to it's just a check in the box. I was in attendance.
Are there other messages from your Inspiring Greatness module, that things that you really hope people will take away from that? I mean, the sort of distilled version?
Yeah, the distilled version, there's 5 modules within Principles of Leadership, but it's just the importance of servant leadership. And that could be writing the note. That could be picking up a trip for a pilot or an in-flight crew member because a graduation is taking place. And so all of a sudden a member of management will fly that trip for him or her so that, by the way, they're being paid for the trip, but this is an important event in your life. And so those cultural differences, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, anybody can purchase airplanes. Anybody can put seats on the airplanes, in-flight entertainment, whatever it might be, build terminals. But it's the human capital at the end of the day. So things like servant leadership, that distilled version within Inspiring Greatness and others, I think just goes a long way.
And Richard, are there echoes of some of these themes in the research that you've seen?
So there are, but before I jump into that, let me just put an urgency to the messages you're bringing here to public education that the research bears out. So first off, the research is very clear that there's no evidence that a low-performing school turns around without effective leadership. Right? The best research is what common sense would say. So when we think about the urgency in our urban schools or schools throughout this country, we have a need to drive quality of leadership into the lowest performing schools, because if we don't, we are basically guaranteeing those kids have no future. But so that's one piece, and it's not just the individual. And as both of you, all 3 of you have said, it's about how you build the human capital. And if you survey teachers, they will tell you the #1 reason to go to the low performing school and to stay there, it's not an incentive pay, it's the quality of the leader. So part of what we talk about here is leaders in our business, and my guess is the same for you, would be they're multipliers of the people in the classroom. So for us, a principal is so valuable in terms of all you've said, setting the vision, the passion. And here's the distinction I would see in the schools and districts I visit is a lot of principals, what will differentiate them, will talk about the passion for teaching and learning. They can't take it a notch below. You know, the ones that I hear and you hear kind of break the mold and do amazing things, they don't talk about passion for teaching and learning. They talk about the passion for teaching and learning every single child up to a very high level and every single teacher, because they know they have to build the culture. So I just want to hit 2 things that you mentioned. So creating the culture for a principal is essential, because too often, whether it's the outside world that says public education doesn't work, or how things have worked in the past, the results aren't good, the first thing the principal has to do is change the culture so that we can say, yes, we can have every child succeed. And yes, we can change how we teach. Because that mindset shift starts to then say, for me as a teacher, well, I might need to do something different. I might need to learn something new. And I need to go to my principal and ask, how can I do things different? So until we do that, changing the culture is so essential. Now, the problem we have is who's stepping up to be principal. Now, in this city, we have the New York City Leadership Academy, which has been an investment from the Wallace Foundation for the last 9 years. We started from day one because we said with Joel Klein's leadership is you got to put the bet on leaders first, and at the same time, then start to move the emphasis on the rest of the human capital in the system, which is the teachers. So we try to make the argument that principals really have to be elevated up. And the last thing I'll say is, and Dave and I were talking about this before, was it's when you look at a leader, if you ask the question how they spend their time. So for a lot of principals, how many principals in the room? If you were to ask the principals, so maybe after this, ask the principals how much time they spend on what we'll call instructional leadership, working with their teachers, working with around student data, engaging the work around improving the quality of teaching. And how much time do they spend on all the other crises that they have to be responsible for? At least from our research, the instructional side, they typically say they will spend about 30% of their time across the week on the instructional side. If that's what's most important, 30% is not good enough. So how do we change the system around principals to support them so that they can do what's most important? And that's where we would argue it can't just be an individual leader. It's got to be the system around the leader. And the mantra we use at Wallace, I brought, and now people mock me for this, is I say, good leader, bad system. Ultimately, you got to bet on the system. So how do we develop the leaders and put them in good systems to do amazing things for kids?
And Abbe and Dave, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience in the schools and what you took away from them, and maybe some of the lessons that you think you could impart to some of the people in the audience.
Sure. Well, it's, I compare it, first of all, the visits to the school are great for me. It's going back to where I went to high school, actually. And what strikes me is really very similar to what goes on in a company. It's really about the people. We've talked about that, human capital. It's really about, how do you get people enthused and excited about what they're doing? And what's rewarding for me when I visit my high school is, the excitement. You pick out, who the teachers are that are so excited about their programs and all of that. And that's very similar to what we look for at our company. What I would translate is a couple of things. One is about empowering people. I mean, it's one of the things that we do as a leader in our company is who are the people that are going to run with certain tasks or certain missions. And, it's the same in a school. Who is that leadership council, so to speak, that whether, they're teachers, teacher aides, whoever it is, and students who can run with something, and you empowering them. One thing that I think is so important, we talked a little bit about culture, and culture is so critical. Not only you feel it when you walk into a school, you get that culture. It's the same as a company. You walk into A&E television networks, you're not in another company. You're there. It's because of the culture. So reinforcing that culture all the time, but the similarity, and I was thinking about this last night in preparation for today, about culture and brand. One of the things we do in the business world is we talk about our brands. JetBlue is a brand, A&E Networks, our History Channel, we're brands. And we really work on creating that brand. How do we do it? A school is very similar. To really look at it and say internally, what is the brand of this school? So when you walk in, you know what that mission is, you know what it stands for, you know what the culture is. And so if you've got the leadership council of that school, starting with the principal and with her, her key colleagues, working through that brand, I think you can really transform a school.
It's a great story. Dave, what are some of your impressions, some of the things you've taken away?
Sure. Adam, it's my experience at PS 153 was terrific, and I'm in the process of transitioning. Dina will see each other on Monday at Aviation High School as well. Really excited about the next partnership, especially with the many students from Aviation High School that work in the aviation industry. The word that comes to my mind is presence. And the brief story that I'll share, and I teach this with my Inspiring Greatness in Others module, I kicked this off with my first visit back in the 2002 time frame. I was met on the curb, and I was met on the curb by a first grader, and Shaquille met me, and I kind of thought this would be a great experience, and that's fine, I'll meet the principal, and I just wasn't 100% sure what to expect. And then he told me I was going to give the morning announcements on the PA after the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And it was I'm going to be talking to 1,800 people, right? And so the students and the educators, and I'm just thinking today how nice it would be to pick up the PA and talk to all of our airline right at one time, as opposed to how complicated that is to do today. I didn't meet Monica George, who was a principal at the time, until Shaquille and I did the administrative task of opening the school that day. And when I met Monica, and then we had the relationship for several years, she's now Deputy CEO within Cluster 3, leading 167,000 students in the New York City school system. I knew there was something special about this person. And the word presence, over time, when I would see Monica in the hallways, knowing every teacher, first name basis with hundreds of students, the respect, the dress, the artwork. I learned about things like Suzuki violin and just these different techniques, the language capabilities. On Mondays you're learning and you're part of Rocket Power and you're the Scooby-Doos on Tuesday. This is English, this is Spanish. Something special was happening at this school. And so I think presence, I've certainly taken that back in terms of there's a lot that we can learn too.
Sure.
As a result of spending time in these partnerships, definitely taking presence back. I know last year we had our 10-year anniversary. I visited each of our 64 locations, quality visits. There is no doubt in my mind a lot of that was because of the imprint that Monica put on me about, again, leading not from the office, but leading from, again, riding the rails, as I would call it in aviation, but riding the skies. And so the word presence. I'll close with this, several times wanted to hire Monica. And she spent time with us at JetBlue, and we still spend time together. And I was speaking last week at a Cluster 3 setting with Donald Conyers and others. And this would not be the right thing to do because she's just too large of a handprint on the youth in New York City that is really that talent that we're going to see in our organization tomorrow. So I love the partnership program. It's meant a great deal to me personally.
That's great. And Richard, earlier you were talking about how so much of the research underscores the importance of good leadership in schools. What are some of the findings about the qualities of effective principals, if you could speak to that?
Sure. So I think that the lessons that you were pulling out at the beginning are so very similar in education, right? Leadership is leadership. It's the question of, can the leadership in education focus on our core mission, teaching and learning? And so it is when you talk about what you're looking for, it's a passion for the high expectations for every child. It's the ability to identify and develop the human capital that's surrounding you. Because one of the things we've tried to do over the last 10 years that we've been focusing on leadership as a foundation is almost trying to kill the hero leader notion. It's not that there will always be that one principal that beats the odds, does amazing things. I can show you teachers, principals. That's not a way to do anything at scale. So part of what we look for and what our states and districts that we've worked with in developing principals is it's the person that can develop the people around them, the team. And typically in education, it has to be very creative because we have principal, sometimes there's an assistant principal, and then a whole bunch of teachers. And so unless you're really reconceptualizing who's a leader, right? So I need to basically say to my teachers, you all are leaders. That's what you both said. How do I empower others to step up and lead? So it's really building the team. It's empowering people. But here's the twist I would say in education that we need to think about. Empowerment without capacity is kind of like chaos, right? You all can go do anything you want, but you don't have a focus on what we're doing. You may not have all the skills, tools, resources to do it. It's not focused. So the leader needs to kind of in both hands hold kind of the development of the people, the clear focus of where we're going, and then the empowerment of the people to step up, fail sometimes, give the feedback, but always develop them to really focus on student achievement. And the last thing I would say is it is this culture of excellence, but culture of accountability also. And Abbe made a comment about the brand. Is I would argue public education has a brand. Whether you want it or not, you get a brand. And right now, the brand in public education is not very good. Part of it is because we've let others brand us, right? Now, some of it is fair, right? Some of it's fair, but not all of it, right? Some people are just whitewashing public education as horrible, right? We have graduates of public education that are stars. So the question we need to be able to do in public education is ask the question, how do we take back the branding of public education? Own what's wrong with it, right? The idea of how we staff our schools, the fact that we put sometimes our most inexperienced teachers in our hardest to educate schools with their hardest to educate kids is insane. You would never do that in your company. So how do we reorientate our systems, so our incentives are our best talent with the kids that have the greatest needs. And I think doing things like that, we can start to rebrand education around excellence. We can rebrand it about as a learning organization. Some people kind of mock public education as not being very focused on learning ourselves. And if we could do that, and I could show you places in this country and in this city where we do that, schools here, clusters there, pockets in regional or district offices. We just need to do it as an organization, and I think we can drive much better education across this country.